two men, 15 centuries apart, both writing about power, leadership, and what it actually takes to survive in a world that does not reward goodness automatically. One was a Roman emperor, the most powerful man in the Western world, who wrote privately every night about how to be worthy of the power he had never wanted. The other was a Florentine diplomat who had watched idealistic leaders destroyed by ruthless ones and decided to write down, clearly and without apology, how power actually works. They cannot both be right. And yet, reading them side by side, you begin to wonder if they were describing the same world and simply making different choices about how to live in it. Tonight, we put Machiavelli against Marcus Aurelius, and we ask the question their work leaves you with. Should you be good, or should you be effective? And what happens when those two things are not the same? Niccolo Machiavelli was not, as his reputation suggests, a man who celebrated cruelty. He was a man who had been educated by reality. He served as a diplomat and civil servant in Renaissance Florence for 14 years, close enough to power to see exactly how it operated, far enough from it to observe without illusion. He watched Florence's idealistic republic fall. He watched the Medici family return to power and dismantle everything he had worked for. He was imprisoned, he was tortured, and when he was finally released, stripped of his position, and exiled to his farm outside the city, he sat down and wrote The Prince. The Prince is not a book about how power should work. It is a book about how power does work. That distinction is everything. Machiavelli's central observation is this: the world is not governed by the rules that polite society pretends govern it. People are fundamentally self-interested. They will support you when it serves them and abandon you when it does not. They will admire your virtue publicly and exploit it privately. A leader who assumes goodwill where none exists is not noble. They are naive, and naivety, in the world Machiavelli inhabited, had predictable consequences. His most famous and most misunderstood argument concerns fear and love. Is it better to be loved or feared? His answer is that it is best to be both, but that when you cannot be both, fear is more reliable. Love depends on the people who feel it. Fear depends on you. A loved leader can be abandoned the moment the emotional calculus shifts. A feared leader maintains their position through a mechanism, the threat of consequence, that does not depend on anyone's goodwill. He was not saying that cruelty is good. He was saying that sentimentality about human nature is dangerous, that a leader who cannot see people clearly, who cannot distinguish between genuine loyalty and convenient loyalty, will eventually pay for that blindness. The argument about virtue is even more uncomfortable. Machiavelli does not say that virtue is worthless. He says that the appearance of virtue is essential, and that the possession of it, when it conflicts with effective action, is a luxury that leaders cannot always afford. A prince should appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and honest. Whether he is these things in practice is a separate question, one to be decided by circumstances rather than principle. This is the line that has made Machiavelli notorious for 500 years. It is also, if you are honest with yourself, a principle you have seen operating in every organization, every political system, and every competitive environment you have ever been part of. The question is not whether Machiavelli was right. The question is what you do with the fact that he was. Marcus Aurelius inherited the Roman Empire at the age of 40. He did not seek it and did not particularly want it. He was a philosopher, a student of Stoicism, who had spent his life reading, thinking, and trying to understand how to live well. Power, in the Stoic framework he had absorbed, was not an end in itself. It was a circumstance, a test, a series of situations in which the only question that mattered was whether you responded with virtue or without it. The Meditations, his private journal, never intended for publication, is the record of a man trying, every day, to live up to that standard. It is full of self-correction, of reminders, of the kind of honest self-examination that most people only manage occasionally, and that Marcus made a daily practice. It is also the most intimate document we have of a powerful person genuinely wrestling with the question of how to use power well. The Stoic position Marcus operated from is unambiguous on the things that matter. Virtue is the only genuine good. Everything else, power, wealth, reputation, even survival, is what the Stoics called indifferent. Not worthless, not to be actively avoided, simply not the point. What this means in practice is that the outcomes of your actions are not fully within your control, and therefore cannot be the measure of whether you acted well. What is within your control is your character, how you respond, what values you act from, whether your behavior reflects the person you are trying to be. A leader who compromises their integrity to maintain power has, in Marcus's framework, already lost. Not the power, the thing that made the power worth having, the self. Marcus ruled during plague, during war, during political crisis. He faced every situation that Machiavelli would use to justify the suspension of virtue. And he kept writing, every night, about the importance of staying good anyway. Not because it was easy. The Meditations is not the journal of a man for whom virtue came naturally. It is the journal of a man who had to keep reminding himself, who caught himself rationalizing, compromising, choosing the easier path dressed up as necessity, and called himself back to account. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. He wrote that not as an affirmation, but as a corrective, as a reminder to a man who, on a given day, had felt the pull of the easier thing and needed to remember why it was not the right thing. That is what makes the Meditations remarkable. Not the philosophy. Other Stoics stated it more clearly. The remarkable thing is the evidence that a man with every reason to abandon the standard kept returning to it anyway. The surface disagreement between Machiavelli and Marcus is tactical. Machiavelli says, use fear, project virtue whether or not you possess it, and act according to results rather than principles. Marcus says, act from genuine virtue regardless of results, because the results are not yours to control and your character is. But the deeper disagreement is about something more fundamental. It is about what human beings actually are. Machiavelli believes people are primarily self-interested. Systems must be designed around that reality, not because it is admirable, but because ignoring it gets you killed. The idealist who assumes goodwill where none exists is not a better person than the realist. They are simply a less effective one, who will eventually be replaced by someone willing to see clearly. Marcus believes people are capable of reason, virtue, and genuine connection. They are not always expressing that capacity. Most of the time they are not, but it is there. And the leader's job is to model that possibility rather than exploit its absence, to be the thing you want the world to contain more of. These are not just different strategies. They are different beliefs about human nature that produce different worlds when acted upon at scale. Here is what the honest answer looks like. Both men were right. Not about everything, but about enough that dismissing either of them is a form of intellectual comfort rather than genuine thinking. Machiavelli is right that naivety about human motivation is dangerous. That people do act from self-interest much of the time. That systems which assume goodwill without building in accountability tend to be exploited by those who do not share the assumption. That the appearance of virtue matters in a world that judges on appearances. These are not cynical conclusions. They are accurate ones. Marcus is right that virtue is not simply a strategy, that how you act matters independently of whether it works in the Machiavellian sense, that a life organized entirely around effectiveness, around winning, around maintaining power, around doing whatever the situation requires, is a life that can produce extraordinary results and an empty self simultaneously. That the person who wins by becoming someone they would not recognize is not actually winning. The tension between these positions is not a problem to be solved. It is a permanent feature of adult life. And the people who navigate it best are not the ones who choose one side and ignore the other. They are the ones who hold both with enough honesty to know which one they are actually drawing on in a given moment. And why? Machiavelli never stopped believing that clear-eyed realism was the most honest gift you could offer a leader. He died in 1527, largely marginalized, his most important work misunderstood in his lifetime, and weaponized after his death as a justification for everything he had merely described. Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD on campaign, still emperor, still writing. His final journal entries show the same man he had been at the beginning, still correcting himself, still reaching toward the standard he had set, still not entirely satisfied that he had met it. The question they leave you with is not which man was right. It is something more personal and more uncomfortable than that. When you compromise your values for a practical outcome, and you have because everyone has, do you do it consciously, with full awareness of what you are choosing and what you are trading? Or do you tell yourself a story that makes it look like the virtuous option was unavailable? Marcus Aurelius wrote his journal to catch himself doing exactly that, to notice the rationalization before it became invisible, to stay honest with himself in a position where dishonesty would have been entirely understandable and largely undetected. Machiavelli would say, that is admirable and largely beside the point. The world does not reward the quality of your self-examination. It rewards outcomes. They are both still right. The question of which man you agree with is less important than the question of which man you actually resemble, and whether those two things are the same.